That threw out. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Matt Grzybowski is with us today. I have the pleasure of knowing with him. I've known him for several years now, worked with him at a couple of different organizations. He is my current boss, so you can feel sorry for him about that. But he's going to talk a little bit today about service ownership and that pivotal role of the service owner. So if you've ever been in an organization where you try to get something and don't know where to go, or you ask someone and say, it's not me, or it's that person that owns that thing, um, I've been there a couple of times. So he's going to talk about the importance of understanding and documenting and reducing that ambiguity around that ownership and increasing that clarity. So without further ado, Mr. Matt Grabowski.
Thank you so much, Adam. I really appreciate the kind words, and again, feelings very mutual. I feel very blessed to be able to work with Adam, and all that he brings. Just a very thoughtful perspective to all that he does, and lots of good and lengthy, deep conversations about what we do in service management. So, as Adam said, I'm going to talk today a little bit about a perspective on service ownership. I'm going to do my best to try to just power through this 20-minute PowerPoint. We will go back. We will talk about anything you want. You can feel free to drop comments in the chat. We can kind of take a look. And we should have plenty of time at the end to kind of go anywhere anyone wants to, and if you've got questions or thoughts about things. So if we move forward, to just give you a little bit of background about myself. So my name is Matt Grzybowski. I currently work at the UW of Wisconsin Health, or UW Health as it's often referred to. I've been in the service management space for about 15 years now. I actually, when I started in IT, I was actually a testing quality analyst working on validating applications and infrastructure for projects before they went live. But our team was near or close to the service quality team. Or service management team, and I always found it fascinating talking to them. They had such a unique perspective of the organization, and I found it fascinating that there was somebody who had a job to look at like metrics and deal with politics and working with teams and talking about like how we're supposed to work. I never understood that. I didn't know that businesses even use or leverages these things called frameworks. So I found it just fascinating, and ended up in an opportunity to work as a change manager on that team then for a few years, and then eventually into a supervisor role leading the team. And just to give you a perspective of kind of when this was the organization had adopted ITIL V2 and actually was just in the process of transitioning over to 3 when I was still in that quality role. So at that point, I'd been doing it for, a number of years and really enjoying it. And what was neat about that organization was the level of adoption that they had taken to the framework. They really, I'm not going to tell you they were perfect by a long shot, but the level of adoption and sponsorship and maturity that they had within their processes cast this really unique perspective that I carry with me to this day, because they had solved through so much, because they had so many of those foundations in place. And now moving into that supervisor role, one of the things I had come to learn was that they had developed this, they had defined all their services, and they had established this concept of service ownership. So my task, not too long before I had left, was they had said, we'd had this in place for a while. It really needs a dust off. We need to go further. So learn it, figure it out, and then take us in a new direction. Give us a new perspective on it. So I had this opportunity now to really learn this concept that, again, it's not really quite pure ITEL, but it lives near it, and the concept made a lot of sense. It plays with a lot of those same concepts. So I had moved on from there to a different opportunity, a different organization, and because they had again wanted to grow and develop their processes in the service management space, and funny enough, also wanted to define their services. Well, as time would go on, I'd learned that actually, as much as they were advised and wanted to develop these things, it actually turned out they didn't, which was okay, right? Not all journeys land in the spot of we're going to achieve the thing we want, and it wasn't so much, I think, the approach that I was taking. It was just more of we just really want to take it and just do things. We don't necessarily want to do it in a formal way, which is fine. Kind of seeing that and finding another opportunity brought me to UW Health, where, again, we're now in another organization where, again, we want to grow and actually formally develop those processes, as well as I'm finding myself in very similar conversations of what is it you say that we do here, and how do we actually manage these things in a consistent way. So in a very kind of interesting perspective, they really did want to embrace this. They really did want these things. And so, we're finding the sponsorship, we're finding definition and really changing the culture in terms of how we're working within our IS and informatics department, to work and aligned in a common way about how we deliver the services that we provide. So in current state, we've got about 40 people that have graduated this service ownership program, which we've stood up. And we've got about 40% that are still in flight, with leaving just a little 20% of people that we still have to kind of work with to move them through it. So it's a little bit about the journey that I've been on and kind of how it kind of nests towards this topic. But I think it kind of gets to that whole like, why establish ownership to begin with? I mean, why does this even matter necessarily, right? Well, we find obviously a lot of times our customers they need a lot of stuff, or they have questions, or they're looking for us to deliver them value, right? And if when you're that smaller organization, I think it's really easy, to just own everything, right? From I'm responsible, I own, I have all of it in my control, so therefore I just deliver, right? But we all know that if we think about those maturity models that we've seen, right? And when we're at that smaller asset level of what we're delivering, that's not, again, it works until you start to grow in scale and size. And then it starts to break because it gets too hard for one person to own so many services or deliver on so many different things. So that specialization comes in place, right? And now it's not that app that we're providing, right? It becomes that service that we're providing because it's many teams that become involved. Well, that concept of service, right? That thing that's of value to our customers, we need somebody to actually oversee that, somebody that the customer can interface with, that becomes that face of that service that interfaces with the customer, with the internal teams, that working across the different party lines and getting that service out to be delivered out, right? So it becomes really important that we have that person to do that. And without it, it gets really that, well, who's actually on first? Who's actually the one that's going to help others? Hard if you don't know what that is. So, of course, I love a good definition. I sure we all love a good definition at this point because we all love the frameworks in different ways, right? And I'm gonna confess. I meant to confess this earlier. A lot of my background is ITEL, specifically V3. I've had V4 and I'm understanding V5, but that's a whole other TED talk for another day. But like, I'm gonna take generally more of a probably, again, what comes out of me tends to be more V3 based, just because it tends to be closer to a lot of the things I feel like we end up talking about. But we all love a good definition. So this is not, you're not going to find this in any particular book, but this is one I've been working with for a while now. But a service owner is accountable for the end-to-end delivery of a service, including the direction, strategy, and performance, regardless of the enabling team or teams or the technologies that support it, where the technologies that support it reside. It's a really important phrase, right? Because this gets you out of a lot of different things, whether you're talking managed services or vendors, whether you're talking different multiple teams internally, whether it's my team or another team. This spans all of it and says, again, if that service provides to many, we have one person who owns that whole life cycle end to end who can talk to that, right? So how does that look? Oh, the next three slides are some of my favorites just because they really just kind of encapsulate that picture of kind of what we're trying to talk to. So if you look at the column that is over to the left side, what I would call this is a lot of what you're supporting or enabling teams, right? They are fundamentally providing support to that service owner who, through direction, is guiding staff or projects in the delivery of service to our customers who fundamentally have feedback to our stakeholders, who talk to everybody, including that service owner, but also our leadership team. And that service owner is going to, of course, provide out reporting in various different forms, but like monthly reporting and service reviews, things like that, to our senior leader, who, of course, is going to have feedback back to that service owner. Again, they're involved in that whole life cycle. They don't do it alone. They need a lot of different support. And again, when you look at that left-hand column, that's not a completely inclusive list and everything's covered. It's really not. There is a few representations for sure, but like when we look at the top, now it's all listed in that yellow color, but notice at the top, there's two gold ones. And then it's a little different because it talks about a different ownership roles. Well, let's take a look at what we're kind of getting at there. When you think about it, you have most services these days. I'm not going to say all, but a lot of services, especially if you're in the IT space, are going to likely have some amount of technology and some amount of application that are used in order to enable the delivery of the service. I work in service management. We have an application that is ServiceNow that runs. There is an application owner that is not me, right? So even in my little example of not directly delivering straight out to outside customers, but internal customers, right? This really does apply. But those three roles together perform, I always call like a triad, right? They need to work together a lot because they're trying to make sure the technology fits the needs of delivery as well as the application is fitting the need of that service, right? Without that, you're going to end up with gaps, right? But what's important here is to remember that that infrastructure owner likely has their own infrastructure support team supporting the infrastructure, which fundamentally supports that service, right? And we all play our different roles in it. Now, one thing I love to when I show this one that usually drives a few conversations is always like, well, wait a second, Matt, help me understand here. I own the application. And I'm also providing. So do I own the service and provide the application? And the answer is no one said you can't own multiple hats. It's actually in some cases potentially possible you do own all three, especially if you're in an infrastructure space. But that's okay. It's okay to own multiple hats. What I think becomes important is to understand that which hat am I wearing and when, and what are the different accountabilities that that hat has or role I'm playing at that point, right? So if I'm an application owner, I'm probably thinking about things like maintenance, upgrades, vendor management, probably road mapping, right? If I'm a service owner, I'm thinking about the service that I provide. I'm thinking about how it's being delivered, the relationships that I have, probably a roadmap as well. And infrastructure is going to have a similar set, similar to the application, right? Upgrades, maintenance, refreshes, all those kinds of things. Vendor management for sure, possibly managed services. I just got to know which hat I'm wearing and what, but they work together. That's what that's meant to kind of show. So this is another one of my really favorite ones. So when I had started at UW, I was in I had been in almost a multi-year conversation with one of the senior leaders, particularly around this concept of how many tickets or how many inputs we have into our organization. You don't understand. There is so many different ways that work comes into our organization. It's infinite almost. And it's like, well, I think that's not true. I think what you're talking about is channels, right? The way it's coming in is email or phone and things like that, right? But it's not like the work only comes in certain time in certain streams. And the reason I like this one, and again, I think it's important when we talk about the role of a service owner. I think you've got to get into the value conversation and the customer. Even though I've had it on the side and I've kind of shown more of kind of the internal workings, but I think it's important to kind of connect the service owner, the customer, and the processes because I think without that view, sometimes I think it gets lost. Or how does it kind of fit into that service management space, right? So we have our customer at the top. Now, fundamentally, our customer has a need. And at the end of the day, all they care about is receiving value, right? That's why they've given us that opportunity for their business. So anything that the customer needs is going to be in green. Anything they find of value is going to be in purple. So let's follow that train of thought for a second. So the customer has a need, right? That need is fundamentally for the service that we deliver. Easy. But let's think about it. So now the service isn't working as expected. It's stopped, right? On the back end, we know because we're all professionals in our service management space, we call that an incident, right? And that customer feels value when that service is restored. You said you provide the service is not working, a service comes back, value is returned, right? Pretty easy. Now, when your services are defined, the customer knows what they can ask for, so therefore they can, and the back end we would call request it, right? And when we then fulfill that request, again, customer's happy, they receive value, everybody's happy. So if it's not broken and it's not requested, then fundamentally it becomes an ask for something new or different. That thing then turns into something we call an idea, right? That thing that we're going to collect. We're not necessarily going to take action immediately, but we need to better understand it. We're going to understand the different ideas that we're getting in from the environment, try to group them together, evaluate them, work and talk with our customers, And we got enough information, we go, hey, I think there's something here. So we're going to move it into a demand. We're going to do further research and look into things like resourcing, costs, alignment, things like that, right? We're going to take all that stuff, move it together and think about it. And then if, boy, it still feels like we should move forward with this, everything makes sense. We talk to the customer, yeah, we're good. Great. And we move it into that project, right? We've decided we're moving forward. Project delivers, we activate a new service, customer feels valued, right? So not infinite, potentially infinite channels, sure, but ultimately it all comes there. Now, one thing that, and part of the other reason I like this now to tie it into service owner, right? I know there's different models coming out these days. There's always been different models of different ways to work, realign your groups, all that stuff. Tons of fun. Get it, makes sense. But from a service owner perspective, even if you're going to say, well, this is a triage team and this is a fulfillment team, great. But you still need that service owner still needs line of sight over what is being delivered because they have to understand the direction of the service, to be able to make changes to the service, to be able to ensure the service still meets the needs of the customer, right? So even if there's multiple groups, again, and that's the beauty of service versus asset, is that we're looking more holistically and keeping that value chain in line for our customer. So spend a lot of time kind of talking about the theory of how it all kind of goes together and those different concepts. So what exactly is a service owner do? I mean, what does that mean at the end of the day? We've got the definition, we've seen how it kind of works through some different flows, but well, to answer that question, um, in the program that we put together, at the end of the day, basically made what we call the pillars of service ownership. Four pillars represent kind of what are the expectations for all service owners. So again, all of our services, well, maybe not all of them, but a high percentage of them are probably very different, right? Kind of like in service management. Why do we do something like incident? And I say everyone has to use that process. Well, because it keeps us talking the same language, regardless of the differences of the services provided. Pillars of service ownership is meant to do the same thing, right? We can have different owners at different parts of the organization, but we all come together in a common way to say this is the expectations for us as owners. So the first pillar is definition. So we have our service owners define what the service is, and we take them through a number of different lenses. Define the service, use language. What are the service? What's the offerings, right? Define what those are. Who are the stakeholders? Who are the customers? Who's the support teams? What applications are used? What's the service level agreements? What are our hours of operations, right? So we get a real 360 view of what that service is. Then we've also added support model. I don't know what your travels have been, but I find that a lot of people go, well, yeah, I know who supports us. But when you get down to it, there's usually holes and gaps. So we take them through that exercise and say, all right, actually tell us, in language, simple terms, how are you supported generally today? Once we're defined, we're going to move over into the second pillar, which is delivery. We're going to take that service information that you've collected. We're going to move it into the system of record, likely your ticketing system. And we're going to get that service information entered so it can be used on tickets, can be used in various different ways in the system so we can collect it and get it back to the service. Now that your service is defined, we can actually make catalog items. That's a whole other TED talk we can have about how do you make catalog items if you haven't defined what the services you provide, because people need things. So but what are you providing, right? Anyway, I don't want to squirrel my own self into a different direction. But then because we know what the service is, we can talk about what the knowledge is. What are the different articles that we can make for either ourselves or our teams because we can relate it back to those services. And then what metrics are we using to understand the delivery today? We move into the third pillar. We're going to take those stakeholders that you likely identified during the definition pillar, and we're going to actually go through and talk about how do we develop a relationship with them. Usually that's established through stakeholder engagement meetings. So how do we talk? What do we talk about? Usually it's going to be things like talking about the delivery pillar, right? How are things delivering? Asking for feedback, providing them information and receiving information from them so we can better understand how the service is providing. And more importantly, establishing a relationship before we need to talk to them about something not going well, right? So we can have an easier time in those conversations. And we wrap things up in the program at the last pillar here, which is called roadmap. What we'll do is we're going to take a more 360 view of what the service is today and tomorrow through the lens of the traditional people process technology lens. We'll talk about things like risks and skills, but what this does is gives us this nice, easy way of being able to talk about what the service is and where it's going and, through those lenses. So, with that said, that is my overview of service ownership. I've seen the chat going, so I know there's probably a question or two. Thanks for allowing me to kind of just blow through that and really kind of just share some perspectives here. Really happy to go anywhere anyone would like to go on any of the topics, either covered here or other places you want to go.
Well, fantastic job, Matt. I do see we have quite a few people in the room. So if you do have a question or a thought, we've got some stuff in the chat I'll bring up here too, but please do raise your hand